I'm Dermot Hussey. Welcome to the YouTube channel for the podcast Riffin Radio. South Africa's Renaissance man, father of South African jazz, archivist and musician, Hugh Masekela. I spoke to his nephew, Mabusha Mandela, who is a researcher and archivist for the Hugh Masekela Heritage Foundation. I spoke to him about his uncle, who is affectionately known as Bra Hugh. Mabusha.
Yes, sir.
I read where you lived most of your life with your uncle, Bra Hugh. How old were you when he had that phenomenal success of Grazing in the Grass in 1968?
I was 3 years old.
Wow. So no.
3 years old. Huey had just come to pick me up, because before that I'd been staying with my Aunt Miriam, Auntie Zenzi as I called her. I was staying with Auntie Zenzi and Daddy Stokely. Yeah, and then my uncle decided that, the young man should be staying in a less kind of like, because, it was quite a heated situation, because when she married Stokely Carmichael, then, they took away a cabaret card, they, disallowed the contracts pretty much, and they removed her from the history.
I remember, yes, yeah.
Yeah, they removed her from the history. So Huey decided that he's gonna come and get his nephew, and apparently the story goes that it was 1968. He was not doing too bad. We were sitting in first class. Everybody was settling in for the ride to LA. And 3-year-old Mabusha stands up in the chair, turns around, raises his arm in the air and says, "Black Power!" And this is like 1968.
Amazing.
Not really a great idea. So Huey kind of like quickly pulls me down to sit me down and be like, dude, chill. And apparently the conversation with Stokely later on went something like, "Man, what are you teaching my nephew?" And Stokely was like, "Yeah, you see, if more black people were like that, we'd be more advanced by now." So yes, I went to go live with him for, to be the first, he was the one that actually drove my mother to the hospital when she had me, when I was birthed. We went to Mount Sinai. We were living in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Hugh and Auntie Zenzi had a place in New Jersey, I think not too far from Dizzy Gillespie's place, because Dizzy sort of served as a mentor to Hugh, especially when he first arrived in the States. And then, my mom was pregnant and she was staying with them, and she started feeling the pains, and Huey made a 30-minute drive in 15 minutes, got to the hospital, and it was me.
Wow.
So yes, I kind of been hanging with him since the day I was born, actually.
How did that breakthrough with Grazing in the Grass affect your lives in California?
I think that Huey was such a unique being and person that it affected our lives in ways that one perhaps would not have expected, because at the time, Huey, he wasn't staying in Compton. He wasn't in the Baldwin Hills. He was staying in Beverly Hills. He was in Laurel Canyon. He was so it was really to me, it was hippie central as far as I was concerned. I remember listening to And it probably didn't happen every day, but all I remember is every day Crosby, Stills and Nash, that first record, was always playing. It was probably not always, but that's my memory of it. And every night, I remember listening to In a Silent Way by Miles Davis. Like, that record reminds me of that time, because to me, that was the kind of, I don't know, that was the kind of situation that we were in. It was musical. It was very, very high hippie. But it was also, it wasn't celebrity, if that makes any sense. You know, it wasn't celebrity. It was just like, yeah, things are going really great and this is pretty awesome. And Huey, like, the thing about Hugh is that he was a friend to everybody. There wasn't a kind of person that Huey didn't become friends with or didn't know or didn't, you know. So David Crosby and Sly Stone, you know. And that was kind of the feel, you know. I've never really thought that Huey was a jazz musician. A lot of people say that, but I don't believe it. I think he's a folk musician with jazz chops. You know, because if you really look at his repertoire, first of all, most of it is like traditional South African songs.
True.
Most of it. And when he's not doing that, he's writing in some sort of South African style. But Huey's like a musician. He's not a jazz musician. He's a musician. He's a musician. He learns about the mechanics of whatever that music is. He's not bound by genres. He's not confused by genres. So salsa. So like Huey knows the difference between salsa and I'm gonna get it wrong, but like the difference between like salsa and Mexican style Latin music. You know what I'm saying?
Hear you, mariachi, the mariachi stuff.
There's a fundamental difference in that, but most people would just say, it's Spanish music, and they're done, right? And like how. So there's a record of his that's about it's two records before The Promise of a Future, which had Grazing in the Grass. The name of the album is Hugh Masekela's latest. Called Arapao, which is a Brazilian song, which I've always loved, and I always loved that song, and I didn't know why I liked that song, but it turns out that I really love Brazilian music like a madman.
You and I.
Anyway, I love Brazilian music, crazy about Brazilian music. So there's this song was written by Edu Lobo. Edu Lobo being a big tropicalismo musician. Edu Lobo wrote the song for Elis Regina. Elis Regina did the song. There was a very big special, I don't remember the year now, but it was on Brazilian TV that kind of showcased tropicalismo. And Elis Regina debuted this song on that television show. What my point about all of this is, besides the fact that it turns out that Huey's turned out to be a very big fan of Elis Regina, I found out when he passed away, and I went through his CD collection, and he had a whole shelf of just Elis Regina. Is that Hugh listened to the music of the time at the time. In the 60s, at that time, there was a big Brazilian wave going on, but they were all listening to Antonio Carlos Jobim, and they were listening to Wave, and they weren't necessarily listening to Gilberto Gil or Elis Regina, or anybody from that was contemporary. And that was what I find remarkable about Huey's musicianship, is that if he's in the DRC, he's going to learn how kwasa kwasa works. He's going to learn how to play kwasa kwasa. In West Africa, he's going to do an album of West African folk music. And he's going to tag in there a South African song, but you, the listener, is not going to be able to tell the difference between the Ghanaian folk music and the South African song that Huey's placed in this collection, because it all sounds as one thing. That's the kind of musician that he was. And that's what I find so remarkable. I mean, on the album called Hugh Masekela is Alive and Well at the Whiskey A Go-Go. Yeah? Hugh Masekela is Alive and Well. He's got a song by the Procol Harum called A Whiter Shade of Pale.
Oh, yes.
He's got a song by that was done by the Fifth Dimension, Up, Up and Away by Jimmy Webb. He's got Taliseni Dikhana, which is a South African song. He's got what he called the Mexican Suite, So, and that album is less than, it's somewhere in the region of 30, 35 minutes long. He's playing all these different genres of music to a hippie crowd who's loving it. They're eating it up. I mean, even that gig at the Whiskey, like there's somebody was talking to me and I was saying, well, one of the things about Huey is that Huey's life is like casually epic. These very, very big things happen, but it's a day in his life. And we're going on to the next thing.
So true.
So Huey played at the Whiskey. The Whiskey was one of the more popular hippie music clubs in the 60s, in the late 60s. Elmer Valentine, I believe his name was the guy who ran that club. Then there was a whole riot on Sunset Strip where the hippie kids came out and they wanted to be out on the strip, and the police and the parents said, no, you guys are supposed to be home. You're not allowed to be out here playing in the street and da-da-da-da-da. So there was this whole riot that went down and people got pushed off of Sunset Strip. In retaliation, the Whiskey, quote unquote, went black, right? So Otis Redding played at the Whiskey and Huey played at the Whiskey. And when they played at the Whiskey, it was after that riot had happened, but it was also in this whole flux of like post Monterey Pop, which is another hippie festival that Huey just happened to be on, and he played. Amazingly enough, Huey on Monterey Pop is where he met Jimi Hendrix and Otis Redding. And one of the reasons that he was at Monterey Pop was because he'd also played on a single by the Byrds, right? So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star. And Huey's on there playing with the Byrds. This is before the Byrds actually came to South Africa. I think it was 69 or 70. The Byrds actually came to South Africa and tried to play some gigs here, which is a whole other story. But that's the thing about Huey, is that these are the people that he knows, these are the people that he meets, but these are also the events that he's somehow a part of, but he doesn't do it in a celebrity kind of way. He just happens to be there at the right time, at the right moment, and he is somebody who brings all manner of people together, because that's who he's playing to. He's playing to an audience. He's playing to people. But in all of that, as adept as he is at adopting other musical forms, he's a man who loves being an African. He loves Mbaqanga, he loves South African music, he loves West African music, kwasa kwasa. Like, He loves being an African. Regardless of what spots he's in or where he may be, there's no question about who he is, where he comes from, and what he's about.